go ahead and take your Bibles and turn to Habakkuk. I like what we did a couple weeks ago, because instead of asking you what you know about each one of these books, I thought it was just good. We took time and turned there 2 weeks ago, and just what verses do you have highlighted and underlined? So before we even get into the video, we'll just kind of do that. Is there any verses that you have underlined in the book of Habakkuk? Because some of these minor prophets, we don't know a ton about them. We don't know a lot about Habakkuk himself. He's, again, a little-known man with a powerful message. But there's some great verses in here, and I love this story. Go ahead, Brother Mark. But the just shall live by his faith. If you don't have that underlined or in there, that's going to be, that really, I believe, is the key verse to this entire book, and we're going to be ending with that tonight. So we're going to come back to that. The just shall live by his faith. Powerful verse right there. That's Habakkuk 2:4. All right, somebody else. Go ahead. Wiley. That's 3:18? 3:18. Yeah, that we're going to come to that. I won't say too much because we're going to look at verse 17 in a little bit. That makes that even more powerful, how that fits in with the whole story of what the book is about. It's good. Miss Johnson, I saw you had your hand up. Yep, the Lord does. He makes it perfectly plain, too. Israel should have gotten it over and over again, that's for sure. So that's good. Anybody else? Any other verses there? Okay, I'll give you a couple that are chapter 2, verse 20. These are just good ones to highlight overall. It says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." God is sovereign. He is in control of all things. I thought that was a good one right there. And then chapter 1, verse 5. "Behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you." And our God is in the business of what? Oh, sorry, I missed one. Go ahead, Miss Megan. Okay. No, that's a good one right there. "In wrath remember mercy," in chapter 3, verse 2. "In wrath remember mercy." Our God is a I liked how David, we talked about that a week ago on Sunday, but how David chose to put his life in God's hand when he gave him the 3 choices of the punishment. And he says, "I'm going to go 3 days of pestilence because the Lord's merciful." So I thought that is the truth. "In wrath remember mercy." That's good. Go ahead, Miss Gray. 3:17 was not mentioned. 3:18 was. 3:19. "Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation." That's excellent. All right, we'll show the overview, and we'll see how all this fits together.
The book of the prophet Habakkuk. He lived during the final decades of Israel's southern kingdom, and it was a time of injustice and idolatry. He saw the rising threat of Babylon on the horizon, and that was not good news for anybody. But unlike the other prophets, Habakkuk does not accuse Israel. He doesn't even speak on God's behalf to the people. Rather, all of his words are addressed personally to God. And the book tells about Habakkuk's personal struggle, his journey of trying to believe that God is good when there is so much evil and tragedy in the world. And so Habakkuk's words are actually poems of lament, and they're very similar to the laments that you find in the book of Psalms. The poet lodges a complaint and then draws God's attention to suffering or injustice in the world, demanding that God do something. And knowing about this lament form, it's actually the key to understanding the design and message of this short book. Chapters 1 and 2 are framed as a back-and-forth argument between Habakkuk and God. And the prophet lodges 2 complaints to which God offers 2 responses. His first complaint is that life in Israel has become horrible. The Torah is neglected, resulting in violence and injustice, and it's all being tolerated by Israel's corrupt leaders. And Habakkuk, he's crying out, asking God to do something, but nothing seems to change. But then all of a sudden, God responds. He says that he's very aware of the corruption of his own people, Israel, and that he's summoning the armies of Babylon to bring down his justice on Israel. And very similar to the message of Micah or Isaiah, God says he will use this terrifying empire to devour Israel because of their injustice and evil. But Habakkuk has a problem with this answer, and so he offers his second complaint. He says Babylon is even worse than Israel. They're more corrupt, they're more violent, they've deified their own military power, they treat humans like animals, gathering them up like fish in a net, he says. They devour nations and people groups in order to build their own empire. And so Habakkuk says, how can you, a holy, good God, use such corrupt nations as your instruments in history? He demands an explanation. In fact, he depicts himself as a watchman on the city walls waiting for God's response, which eventually comes. God tells Habakkuk to get out some tablets and chisel and write down what he sees and hears. It's a vision about an appointed time in the future, that even though it may seem slow in coming, it will eventually come. In fact, God says that the righteous person will live by their faith in this hope and vision. So what is this divine promise that Habakkuk is supposed to write down? It's that God will bring Babylon down. God says that the violence and oppression of the nations creates this never-ending cycle of revenge, and that God will use this cycle to bring about the rise and fall of nations. And the fact that God might for a time use a corrupt nation like Babylon does not mean that he endorses everything that they do. He holds all nations accountable to his justice, and so Babylon will fall along with any other nation that acts like them. God's promise is then elaborated by a series of 5 woes that describe the kinds of oppression and injustice that's perpetrated by nations like Babylon. The first 2 target unjust economic practices, like how wealthy people will charge ridiculous interest just to keep poor people in debt, and so they build their wealth through crooked means. The third woe is a critique of slave labor, treating humans like animals and threatening them with violence if they don't produce. The fourth woe targets the abuse of alcohol by irresponsible leaders. While people are suffering under their bad leadership, they're partying and wasting their money on sex and booze. And the last woe exposes idolatry, the engine that drives such nations. They have made money and power and national security into their gods, offering these allegiance at all costs. And so people become slaves to their own national empire. Now, the practices described here aren't unique to Babylon, but that's part of the point. Given the human condition, most nations eventually become Babylon. And so this is how God's answer to Habakkuk in this book becomes God's answer to all later generations, to anyone who lives in a world ruled by other Babylons. But it leaves the question hanging. Is God going to let this cycle, the rise and fall of Babylon-like empires, go on forever? And that question is what chapter 3 is about. We're told that this is a prayer of Habakkuk, and it begins by Habakkuk pleading with God to act now in the present like he has in the past in bringing down corrupt nations. And what follows is a very ancient poem. It first describes a powerful, terrifying appearance of God. It's very similar to the opening poems of Micah and Nahum, and similar to the appearance of God at Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. There's cloud and fire and earthquake. When the Creator shows up to confront human evil, everybody will be paying attention. Habakkuk then goes on to describe this future defeat of evil as a future exodus. So just like God came as a warrior and he split the sea in his battle against Pharaoh, Habakkuk says that God will once more bring his judgment down on the head of the evil house. So Pharaoh, like Babylon, has become here an archetype of violent human nations. But at the same time, we're told that when God confronts evil, he will save his people and his anointed one. It's a reference to the king from the line of David. And so in this poem, the Exodus story of the past has become an image of the future Exodus God will perform. He will once again defeat evil and bring down the pharaohs and the Babylons of this world. He'll bring justice to all people and rescue the oppressed and the innocent. And it's this hope that enables Habakkuk to conclude the book with hopeful praise. Even if the world's falling apart with food shortage or drought or war or whatever, he will choose trust and joy in the covenant promises of God. And so Habakkuk, by the end of this book, becomes a shining example of how the righteous live by faith. Habakkuk recognizes just how dark and chaotic the world and our lives can become, and he invites us into a journey of faith, of trusting that God loves this world more than we do, and that he will one day deal with its evil. And that's what the book of Habakkuk is all about.
All right. That's good. We're just going to kind of review that just a little bit, and then I'm going to get into some of the points that I want to talk about, just practical points that I took away from this study tonight. Habakkuk's an interesting book because it's not necessarily a message of judgment towards Israel or towards any other nation. It really is a back and forth between Habakkuk and God. And so you start in chapter 1 where he's questioning God. And just before I get into that, I'll just say he's the last prophet that's sent to Judah, and basically at this point there's no turning back. I mean, the judgment is coming, punishment's on their way. There's no more chance for repentance at this point. I mean, God has warned and given them every opportunity for it. It's imminent. It's coming. He's alive, I believe, even when the Babylonians come in and when they start taking out Judah and when they start destroying it. And so that's where he's alive, and that's what's going on. So he sees this looming. He knows that Israel's corrupt. I thought that was an interesting statement there where he said that most nations eventually become Babylon. And, what's the guy's name that said, when America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great? Come on, we got all you history teachers in here. Where's Dale Boyce? Come on, Dale, let's see how good you are right here. Okay, de Tocqueville. I got it, right? Isn't it? Yes, okay, Alexis de Tocqueville. I was just thinking about that as he was going through, because it is so true. The farther we get from God, it's not just good. The farther we get from God and biblical principles, the more corrupt we come and the more like Babylon we become. And on those 5 woes that were listed out there, you see all of those things that are starting to play out in our country even today, and some of the warnings that are going on and taking place. There's so many ways that you can apply God's word to today's time. But Habakkuk here, he's having a back and forth with God. I mean, the first question that he asks God is in chapter 1, verse 2, and he says, "How long shall I cry and thou wilt not hear?" I mean, he's burdened about what's going on and what's taking place in the land of Israel. They had experienced a little bit of a revival under Josiah the king. All right, Josiah was the one that had the word of God read, and when he heard the law, he realized how far they had gotten from God, and he repented, and there was a revival that broke out in the land temporarily. Well, Josiah died in battle and to the Egyptians, and he died, and then his sons and grandsons took over, and it just fell back into immorality, idolatry, and things went downhill quickly. And so Judah is filled with violence, strife, perverted justice. It's not a place or a land that you want to live in. It's dangerous. They're experiencing all the consequences that come from sin. Every man's doing that which is right in their own eyes. And Habakkuk, knowing God and knowing his word, is crying out to God, how long are you going to allow this to happen before you come in and punish it? And Habakkuk even knew God's promise that he would make of them a great land, that the seed of David would rule on the throne forever. So I don't really know in the back of his mind if he thought that they were going to be totally destroyed, the temple was going to be wiped out. So he's crying out to God, and he's asking God this question, and God's answer is, it's not going unpunished. Babylon is on their way to punish Israel. Well, he didn't really like that answer. Maybe he wanted them to be punished, but that's question number 2 that comes up in chapter 1 in verse 13. Question number 2, he says, "Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth a man that is more righteous than he?" He's saying, how is this right and how is this just that you're going to use a nation like Babylon that is far more, okay, Israel's got problems, but Babylon's really got problems. I mean, Israel's more righteous than Babylon. So how are you going to take this really corrupt, unrighteous nation, and how are you going to use them to punish us? I mean, that's not what I was looking for. That's not the answer that I was going for here. So you have this back and forth that's playing out against God. And so God answers that question as well. And he says, guess what? Babylon's going to be destroyed. So this is chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 basically gives the answer to question number 1. At the end of chapter 1, he asks question number 2. But all of chapter 2 is basically the answer. And there's 5 woes that he pronounces. And that's where we saw how he was talking about covetousness that leads to unjust economics, slavery. By the way, I just wanted to show you one verse under slavery. Look at verse 14 of chapter 2. It's after all of these woes, he just kind of pronounces the judgment that's going to come on Babylon as a result of it. But after he talked about slavery, in verse 14 he says, "For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." And I thought that's a powerful verse that you can underline right there as well. And I just thought that was interesting when when man mistreats man, who's created in the image of God. That's not something that God deals with lightly, and that's not something that he just turns a blind eye on. And it's just interesting, in the middle of all those woes, after slavery and after how man treats man unjustly and in wrong ways, he says, "For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." I think he just puts a little bit of an extra emphasis on that. So he's going through all the ways Babylon's going to be destroyed and for what reasons they're going to be destroyed. And then at the end of all of that, that's where chapter 2, verse 20 says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." So he's questioned God. God gives his answers. And Habakkuk just says, let God be God. He's in his holy temple. He's sovereign. He's in control. His ways are not our ways. His plans are not my plans. His ways are higher. His thoughts are higher. He knows what he's doing. And he just says, let all the earth be in silence before him. What a powerful thought that is right there. So you have him going from chapter 1 where he's questioning God. And have you ever been there, by the way? Have you ever questioned God? Has there ever been things that you've wondered about? Have you ever had anybody ask you, well, if God's a good God, why does he allow this? Why somebody who's given their whole life to serving the Lord, why does he allow that person's wife to suffer from cancer? Or why does he allow people to hurt them, and sometimes even people in the church that love you and care about you? Why does he allow them to stab you in the back and for people to mistreat you? And why does God allow things like that? I think everybody's been there, or you've been asked questions like that before. It's a normal part of life because we live in a sinful, broken, messed up world. And so he's going with this back and forth. God answers him, and now he's keeping silence before him, and he's standing in awe of who God is. And you know what chapter 3 is? All of chapter 3 is a song. He goes from protesting, how long, God, do you not hear me? How long are you going to allow this to happen? Are you not doing anything? Do you see all the sin and wickedness in your land? You're going to send Babylon in here to destroy them? And then by the time he gets to chapter 3, he's now singing a song of praise to God. And that's what's happening. That's how that chapter is being played out. 3 times throughout chapter 3, he uses the word Selah, which shows up a lot in the book of Psalms. And really, it's a musical command. It's a musical direction. That's what that note is. And then even at the end, the very last phrase of chapter 3, verse 19, he says, "To the chief singer on my stringed instruments." So by the time he gets to chapter 3, it's a prayer that's accompanied by music, and it's sung with a spirit of excitement and victory. Now, that's even more amazing because guess what? How did we start off at the beginning? Destruction's going to happen, right? There's no way they're getting out of it. Babylon is going to be destroyed. And Habakkuk knows this. This is not going to be a happy ending for him and his historical time period. He's going to see some devastating, horrible things happen in the land of Babylon. And he's protesting God. He's questioning God. God gives him his answer. He's silent before him. He sings a song of praise. And that's where those verses 17, 18, and 19 come into play. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, because this is what's going to happen in the land of Israel. Neither shall fruit be in the vines. The labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls, which all of that translates into major economic problems in the land. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet. This book, Habakkuk, is sounding a whole lot more like a Psalms than it is one of the minor prophets. And that's what I thought was neat, just getting that whole picture. Now, let's look at a couple practical things of how we can apply this. So, first question that I have for you is this. Is it okay to question God? Okay, you're right. As long as it's with the right spirit and the right attitude, it is okay. The Bible teaches that asking questions is the normal response to painful circumstances in life. It's the most. I'm so thankful in Psalms where it says that He knoweth that we are but dust. He knoweth our frame. I think is how that verse goes, and that we are. God knows us, and He knows that we are weak and feeble and frail, and He knows that when certain pressures of life start coming down on it, that we're going to naturally ask questions, and that's what Habakkuk's doing, and it's okay. We ask, why is this happening to me? How can I get it to stop? What's going to happen to me? Is it ever going to end? Can I be sure it will never happen again? Those are all things that we want to know and that we ask in the middle of the trials that we go through. David did this in Psalm 13. He says, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? David was asking questions that any normal being would ask. Have you ever been there too? Have you ever been in a trial that it just seems like it's never going to end either? And you just, at first you find out about it and, you take it and you've got your faith and trust in God and your confidence, but then it keeps dragging out and a month goes by and 2 months go by and it starts going to be about a year. Sometimes it's a couple years in and you're just, how long? How long, oh God? Are you there? And does he feel like sometimes he's not even there and he's not even present and he's far from you? That's what Habakkuk's feeling like here. That's what David's felt like. These are things that we can relate to in a very strong way because we've all been there and we all understand what he's going through. Look at the key to all of this, though. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. I thought this was so interesting. This jumped out at me. So Habakkuk's questioning and he's protesting really against God in a sense. And he says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower. Okay, so this is after question number 2. And then so he says, okay, he asks a question. And he said, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Just thought that was interesting. He already knew he was going to get reproved. He already knew he was wrong. He's questioning God and he's saying, how long? And do you hear me? And are you there? But even though it felt like God wasn't, he knew that God was there. He knew God was in control. He knew that God had a plan, even though it didn't seem like it and even though it didn't feel like it. I think that's the key right there when we're questioning God. We're not proud saying, okay, fine, God's going to treat me like this, so I'm just done and I'm going to walk away from you. That's not his attitude. His attitude is, here's my questions. I'm going to sit back and I know you're going to reprove me. So I'm going to listen and I'm going to learn. And I thought that's the key to it right there. He knew he was going to be reproved. And ultimately, that's how he got to the point where he was able to praise the Lord in chapter 3. I came across this article while I was studying for this day, and this question just stood out at me, and I wanted to ask this because I thought this was so powerful. But what question will God always answer? What question will God always answer? When we're going through those trials, a lot of times we ask how long or why or what, and we want to figure out all of those things. But you know what question God will answer every single time? He'll answer the question, who? He'll answer that question, who? Think about this. Who will save me? Who will give me mercy? Who will rescue me? Who loves me unconditionally? Who knows my every thought? Who will care for my every need? Who will give me strength? Who will work this for good? That's really the questions have to, when you go back to even Psalm 13 and Psalm 10, I didn't read a verse from there. David starts off and he's saying how long, and he's saying what, why, how, all of these things. But by the end, he just stops asking those questions and he finds God. He sticks with it. He doesn't just stop there and turn his back on God. He keeps on going till he discovers, until he finds God. And he does not stop short of that till he gets to that point. And when we turn the questions from the what and the why and the what's going on, and we just remember that God is sovereign, that he's in control, and we remember all of the promises that he's given us in his word, and we start saying who, where can I get my strength from? Who's going to strengthen me? God's going to strengthen you. Who's going to give me peace? Because I don't feel like there's any peace at all in my life that I'm going through. Who will give you peace? God's going to give you peace. Who's going to supply my needs today? I don't feel like I can handle this another day. Who? God will. He'll help you get through today. He'll help you get through tomorrow. He's going to be there with you every single step of the way. He will answer that question every single time, and it will turn the questions into praise when all of a sudden you start finding God and discovering how real in his presence, that peace that he gives that passes all understanding. But it's a fight and it's a struggle, and it doesn't come easily, and sometimes it has to happen every single day over and over and over again. But just remind yourself of who? God. He's powerful enough to change your circumstances and to pull you out of wherever you're at, and never lose sight of that. I thought that just jumped out at me, and I wanted to share that with you tonight. What question will God always answer? Who? He's going to be there with you every step of the way. So, and then my second question that I wanted to ask tonight by way of practical application is, how did Habakkuk go from protest to praise? All right, so it was okay to question God. And we know that God answers, and when we start searching for God, we're going to find him when we search for him with all our heart, and we're going to find that he's going to be there. But the key to that, and the key to this whole book, is in chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him. but the just shall live by his faith. The just shall live by his faith. How did he even get to that point where he says, okay, I'm going to wait for God to reprove me? What did he already know? He already knew the answers, right? He already knew God was in control. He already knew that God was good. His faith was there even in the midst of it. He didn't lose faith. The pressures of life were mounting up, but he turned to the right person. He went searching for God, and he was asking God questions. He's in the right place. The just shall live by his faith. So, two practical ways then to apply to the actual context of the book. One of the problems with the nation of Israel was the fact that they were violent, that it was full of strife, that there was perverted justice. Do we live in a land like that? We do, man. Our country's, Atlanta and I were talking about, we've been in New York City many times. I feel like it's gotten a little bit dirtier than it has been in a long time. I just feel like it was just a little bit different this time that we were there. I was in the dead center of Times Square. I mean, where all the lights are, people are everywhere. We came out of one store, turned a corner. I was going down a street, and a guy says, "You want to buy some Coke?" And I was like, "Coca-Cola? Yeah, I could use a cold one right now." He asked me that, and I was like, I just kept on walking, and didn't really think much of it. I was like, did he really just ask me that? This is some kind of joke or whatever. I turned, we were down the wrong street, so we turned around to come back, and sure enough, as I'm going back, he's got a plastic bag with white powder in it, and he's got some other guys handing him cash, and I started looking for a cop. I was going to turn him in. I wasn't going to play around with that. But they're everywhere. I couldn't find one at that time, but, that was just happening right there, and that's the first time I'd ever been offered anything like that. That's the world that we live in. I mean, we're living in a world that has issues, that's broken. All right, so what's the answer to that? How do we turn that back around? What's interesting is God's not telling his people in this book to live righteously and to live justly. He's not saying that at that point in time. Does God care about how we live, and does God care about our actions? Does he want us to live righteously? Yes, absolutely. He wants us to apply all of his law, but what he says? What the heart of the problem was? The just shall live by his faith. Before you can fix the outside, you've got to fix the heart. And I was just reminded about that again. The problems in our country are not, we get black. We were in Washington, D.C., and politics and all that stuff, and we have things that are blasted in front of us, and there's things that bother us to our core as human being. Another thing, just real quick, that right before that happened with the drugs, we walked out of that store, and there was a mob coming by, basically. It wasn't a large maybe 50 people or whatever, and they're marching through New York City, and they're protesting against the cops, and they're just saying some really awful things about the police officers and things like that. And what I found was very interesting was right behind them, protecting them, were 5 NYPD officers, and so this whole group comes by, and my blood got boiling a little bit, and they walked by, and then I saw the 5 police officers following them, and I said, before I even could hold myself back, I just shouted out, "We love the cops!" Back the blue, And Atlanta's like, "Be quiet, what is wrong with you?" And I couldn't help myself, but the cops didn't even smile. I was expecting them to be like, but they're so used to all kinds of crazy stuff happening, and different things like that. I bring that up to say, we get so bothered by the outside, exterior things. But we have to remember, all of the things that we get fired up and excited about politically those are just symptoms. The problem is the heart. The just shall live by. This is a salvation verse, but this is also a verse by which we live by. And we have to remember, and what we have to be burdened about is people. And we have to see past the issues, and we have to see past the problems, and we just need to see that our world is full of sinners that need to know about the transforming power of Jesus Christ. And for you and I even, that applies to us too. Sometimes we focus on all the things that we know we should be doing on the outside, but unless our heart is truly in tune with God and where he wants us to be in our walk with him, in our relationship with him, everything about the Christian life is going to feel like drudgery and work and habits and things that we have to do. But if God has our heart, all right, and if we're living by faith, the just shall live by his faith. If we are putting our faith and trust in Jesus Christ and who he is, and this is what I've been challenging our young people about all year, our seniors. I keep asking, take it a step further. We've put all our emphasis on some of the commands of God and some of the things that he tells us that we can do and we can't do, and things that make sense to us or that don't make sense to us, things that we like or we don't like. Okay, we put all of our emphasis. Ask the deeper question. Why does God say that? Why has God given us that command? What's the point of it? If God's asking us to do something or to not to do something, it's for a good purpose. There's a protection there. There's a blessing that he wants to give us as a result of it. So don't just stop at, I have to do, no, look a little bit further and by faith believe that God's going to ask me not to do this because he has something good for me in this command that's going to be a blessing in my life because God's a good God. And take that a step farther. It's a heart condition that has to be solved before the outward and the externals. And it wasn't that Israel had a reform under Josiah, but it didn't get to their heart because as soon as he died, they went straight back to their problems and they went straight back to their sin. So never forget, it starts in the heart. And that's where it happens right there. So that's one question. The solution for the violent strife and perverted justice, it's the just shall live by his faith. And then the second question is, what's the key to life in the midst of destruction? What's the key to life in the midst? It's faith is what saves, and faith is the key to life. It's not just a salvation verse. Yes, the just shall live by faith. We got to put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. But it's deeper than that. We live by faith. We live by faith. You know, one of the things that has jumped out at me, just talking about faith that banishes despair, we don't admire... The people that we admire in the Bible are the people that were full of faith, okay? We don't admire David's brothers. Remember when he went out to fight Goliath, what were his brothers doing? They were cowards hiding. We admire David who had faith. We don't admire his brothers. We don't admire the 10 spies, do we? We admire the 2 spies. We admire Caleb and we admire Joshua who said, we can go take this land that's full of giants. We don't admire those other 10. We don't admire Thomas. Thomas didn't just doubt where he said, hey, until I see the scars in his hands and in his feet. There was another time where Jesus said, we're going to go back to Jerusalem, and Thomas was just like in John chapter 10, he's just like, let's just go back and die with him. He's going to die. We're just going to go die with him. I mean, that was Thomas's approach to, that's where he was at. Like, those are not the people that we admire. We admire people that were what? Full of faith. We admire people that in the midst of the darkest moments of life, and that's where Habakkuk was. Trouble was coming. Things were falling apart, and he still lifts his eyes to God. And chapter 3 is really a song about God and his salvation. And by faith, he believed that in the end, it was all going to work out, and it was all going to be okay. And so everything about my life, you strip it all away, like verse 17 is talking about. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Because in the end, it's all going to be okay when we stand in the presence of God and we get to be welcomed into eternity with him forever. Those are the people that we admire. And so the just shall live by his faith. Every day we get up, we got to put our faith in the promises of God. We got to trust in his promises, and we got to keep on going. And that's how we go from that protest to praise. And we start singing about how great our God is, because we'll find that strength. We'll find that joy. We'll find that peace. We'll find every bit of what we're looking for when we get our eyes fixed on him. And so I like the book of Habakkuk. I say that every week. Man, this was a powerful book. I've enjoyed these studies and learning some of those things. Brother Si,